I have gone from, of course, I can do this and I can do that and I can do this other thing to, yeah, I know I can do that, but I don't want to because you can't be good at everything. And then that's how you end up running in 17 different directions. If you don't do something all the time, don't have a process for it, now you're relearning it every time you do it. And so you're really not making any profit off of it. It's just you have, at that point, just bought yourself a job, not a business.
One of the big things that you will definitely learn if you are a lawyer and you decide to start a firm is that you really do have to learn the business side of running a firm, which can be slightly different than just practicing law. Well, without further ado, let me bring my amazing guest, Russell Farbiarz. Welcome to the show, Russell.
Thanks, Terrell. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's always a pleasure to have you. Now, Russell, before we jump into the details of your firm and what that journey's been like, can you give us a little bit of context on what is your background and what made you decide to go into law?
I've wanted to be a lawyer for longer than I can remember. I grew up always thinking that I was just going to be a lawyer. And it's funny, I was having this conversation with my dad on the phone yesterday because we were talking about when I decided to go to law school. And sometimes the sad truth is that a lot of people go to law school because they don't know what else to do. I graduated from college with a politics degree and a history degree. And so I really was qualified to do one of two things, either teach or go to law school. And I thought about both of those options, but I ended up going to law school.
When I went to undergrad, my background was in business administration. And one of the things I was always curious about when people major in political science and then go to law school next. Did this political science, does it really prepare you for a law school, or is it just like law school is like a whole new learning and discipline?
The only real undergraduate study program that can prepare you for law school, from what I understand, is philosophy. Being a politics major and a history major just means that I knew a lot about dead things and I knew a lot about people who like to argue about policy. But being a philosophy major actually teaches you how to think more analytically the way that the lawyer typically will do.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. So as you got into law school, did the nature of law school, I guess, when you got there, were you prepared for it since you wanted to be a lawyer as long as you can remember when you got into law school? Was it like, did it live up to your expectations? Were you like, hey, I underestimated some of this, or?
There's no way to really know what to expect when you're going to go to law school. And in orientation, they do the proverbial look to your left, look to your right. One of these people won't be here by the time you graduate. And it's actually true. I don't really know exactly what I thought it was going to be, but it's definitely 3 years where you're just going to work and work and work, and then you're going to do some more work because it's intense. It's definitely intense.
Gotcha, gotcha. And then what was it like coming out of law school when you first started your journey as a lawyer or moving down that path?
So I came out of law school. When you're in law school, they tell you that the best job that you can get right out of law school is being a law clerk. I'm not sure that's actually true. It all depends on what you want to do. But that's what I did is I got a job as a law clerk. I lived in Bennington, Vermont for about a year, working for some trial court judges there. It was an interesting experience. I got to see a lot of different things, a lot of different proceedings, but it was very much in an observer role, and I was anxious to stop being an observer and start being an active participant. After that, I did get a job with the district attorney's office, and that gave me some experience being in the courtroom, learning how to walk, talk, and chew gum at the same time while in a court proceeding. And then ultimately, I did end up in private practice.
Gotcha, gotcha. Now, how was that transition, or was there things that led to you making that decision of going into private practice?
I was fortunate because the practice that I joined was actually my father-in-law's practice, and his partner was choosing to retire and had approached me and said, "I'm retiring. I'd like to see if you want to step into this role and take my place." And I was fortunate in that regard. Working with family can always be a challenge, but we were able to find a way to navigate things together. And so like I said, I was fortunate because it wasn't that I started my own business. I came into an already existing and successful practice.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Now, one of the other things that I'm curious about is as you go through law school and like I said, your early stage of your legal career, it's at what point did you decide, hey, this is the type of law that I want to focus on?
You come out of law school and there's just so many different options. And the one thing when I was in law school, I said I don't want to do is criminal law. And there I was practicing criminal law as a prosecutor. But I always had an interest in estates and estate planning and administration. I did study that in law school. The practice I joined that did have had a very large it was a very large component of the practice that already existed. And so I continued to learn more and more about that practice area. And I really found it very interesting because I'm a big proponent of people having a plan and making sure that they're being intentional, that you're putting the pieces together so that when you would pass, that it's not absolute chaos, but there's actually an ordered process. And I think that is incredibly beneficial and underutilized.
Mhm. No, I would agree. It makes it probably a pretty interesting business perspective for you. Estate planning is something that is, I think it's a phenomenal, is an extremely wise thing. From a business perspective, do you ever feel like you're fighting against I guess you'd say, the human need to not want to think about death and then not plan ahead?
All the time. I'll never forget. Early in my practice, I had a client who came in, and I don't remember what she was there for, but I said to her, "Well, while you're here, do you want to prepare a will?" And she said, "Oh, not today, but I'll make sure I do that before I die." And I looked at her and I said, "All right, just give me a call the day before you die, and we'll get it taken care of." Needless to say, I'm fairly certain we did her will that day.
It's so when you say it out loud, it's something that sounds funny when you say it because it's like, wow, really? Yeah, they're really the logic behind that. It's just, yeah, it doesn't make as much sense. But I often find that a lot of people don't like to think about those two, or they don't like to think about death and they don't like to plan ahead. So as you kind of work through that in your business side, what have you seen people really gravitate to, or how have you been able to help people realize, hey, this is a plan to be made, let's act on it, let's not delay?
I try to talk to people about the fact that it is a plan. I have found that if we try to break things down into easy, more digestible steps, it's far easier for people to get on board with. Because I find that most people, when they get to the end of our process, they'll say, "That was a lot easier than I thought it was going to be." And I have found, particularly as I've been more intentional with how I approach my business over the last, say, 2 years or so, that it's been a lot easier to make that more accessible for people.
So what I really want to dive into a little bit more is what that kind of that the way of thinking, how that kind of changed when you went from, like I said, practicing law to then said being a partner in a firm to where now you're practicing law, but you also got to think about the actual business of the firm. So how was that transition for you?
I've always looked at the practice of law as a business. I've always thought of it conceptually in that way. I don't think that I ever, until the last couple of years, really thought about it and tried to implement more business practices in the practice, because I think as lawyers we are taught that we are professionals and we are lawyers and therefore we are special, which is not always true. And if there are any lawyers that are listening to this, I'm sorry, you're not as special as you think you are. And as a result, we are told that we are exempt from the normal considerations that someone would have when they're running a business. There are very few, if any, at least when I went to school, courses in law school that talk about running a practice. I The only one I recall, there was, I think, a 2 credit course on interviewing clients. That was pretty much the extent of here's how you actually do this from a practical business perspective. And then you're in the midst of trying to manage deadlines and manage clients, and it's hard to take a step back and say, now, wait a second. What do I need to do to make sure that I'm doing things the most efficient in the most efficient way possible? I'm doing things that are going to actually make me money rather than just take every client that walks through the door because they're here. Actually have a cohesive marketing plan, actually have procedures that can be followed so that it's not you're not at the hub of the wheel with everyone coming at you from all directions saying, I need X, Y, or Z. It's I feel like over the last 2 years, I've spent a lot of time thinking about how we can my practice can run more like
Mhm.
a well-oiled machine or like a business as opposed to just a lawyer-centric practice.
I think that's a very interesting point, and I'm glad you brought up the point about with the type of clients that you expect, because even when I tell different, whether it's my clients or just business owners, or even on the show, when I tell people like sometimes they're a little caught off guard. They're like, "Oh, you're an accountant. You should be thinking about getting every dollar you can." But it's just that point about you probably shouldn't accept everybody who wants to do business with you if they don't meet the criteria that you have for the type of people that you can really help. So how has that been of in the for yourself and in the firm of just getting to that point where you felt really comfortable saying, you know what, we're gonna accept the people that we can actually help, and that may mean we don't. There's some people that we can't help.
It's hard. I'm gonna tell you that right out front because it's really hard when someone knocks on your door or in this case walks into your Zoom room and says, "I wanna give you money to do this thing that you know how to do." But I have I have gone from, "Of course I can do this and I can do that and I can do this other thing," to, "Yeah, I know I can do that, but I don't want to," because you can't be good at everything. And then that's how you end up running in 17 different directions. If you don't do something all the time, don't have a process for it, now you're relearning it every time you do it, and so you're really not making any profit off of it. You have, at that point, just bought yourself a job, not a business, and that's not and then who is it? I'm trying to remember the author of the guy who wrote the E-Myth, who says, "Now you work for a crazy person." I've been reducing some of the practice areas I covered, and one of those is that I formerly took family law cases. I no longer do that, but with some of the clients that I have, if the case is moving in a direction I don't want to go in, I have helped the client find new counsel because I don't want to get stuck in something I'm no longer comfortable doing. But at the same time, you don't want the client to be stuck.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Yeah, and I guess do you find that in case of practicing doing estate planning and real estate law, is that do a lot of those cases end up bleeding over into family law, or do they usually see those? They usually are pretty clearly distinct.
They're usually clearly distinct from the outset. You can have elements of what I would call family law in an estate administration case, a probate case. You have to take in when you're doing estate planning, you have to take into consideration the family dynamics. So if there can be again aspects of the family law or divorce that you would take into consideration, but there's a difference between litigating a divorce and helping someone create a plan in case of divorce.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. No, that makes sense. Now, one of the things that I think a lot of people are always very interested in is when they hear the type of work that you do, the type of law that you support, that your firm supports, how can they either find you online, or how can they see what the firm is up to and how they can work with you guys if they need your services?
Sure. So we have a fairly robust online presence. We do have our website, which is antonavichfarbiarz.com. You can certainly access us there. If you go to contact us, that will actually get you directly into our CRM. Unfortunately for you, maybe you'll start getting some emails and some text messages about us. We also do have a Facebook page and an Instagram page that are fairly active. So you can find us both on Facebook and Instagram. And I also am on LinkedIn.
Awesome. I love it. I love it. Before we wrap up, one of the questions that I always love asking every guest that comes on is when you think about where you've been from your career and your background to where you are now with your firm, what's two pieces of wisdom that you would share with other law firm owners? And it could be a reiteration of something else that you've already said.
So be intentional and ask for help. I have found, particularly over the last 2 years, that being involved with business coaching programs that are geared towards attorneys has helped me a lot. I've met a lot of like minded attorneys who I now feel like I have a community of people who I can bounce ideas off of. And I call them my advisory board because if I'm thinking about doing something new, I think there's three, four, maybe five people in this group, and we're all single owner attorney law firms where you don't really have a lot of internal people to bounce these ideas off of. We share resources. And I think it's also important, be intentional. Figure out what you want to do and then figure out the way to get there because otherwise you just end up going here, there, and everywhere trying to get things done.
Awesome. I love it. Russell, thank you for being an amazing guest on the show. It's been a pleasure having you.
All right. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Law Firm and Finance Show, where we give you great content that helps you build a more successful law firm. So make sure you hit that subscribe button on all platforms and follow us for more content.